All right, we're about a minute after the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started today. My name is Bradley Martin. I'm with Kindful. I lead the marketing and sales efforts here at Kindful, and I'm really excited to bring this content to you guys and to have NextAfter and Brady Josephson with us to present this content. So just a little background. Kindful actually sponsored this content this year. Brady and NextAfter got in touch with us and told us they were going to produce this content around email cultivation. And we really just know for our audience specifically and Kindful users, this is something that we see people ask us a lot about, is how to create good email marketing strategies and things like that. And so as we started to dig into the content and to what they had learned, we were just super excited to help bring this content to fruition into the market. And so couple quick housekeeping notes. There is a guide, a research study that is completely that pairs with this information. If you haven't downloaded already or seen us share it, we're going to send it along with the recording after the webinar. It likely will be sometime tomorrow that you'll receive all that information. And so you'll be able to go and download that data or download that guide and download the slides and the recording. And so also, if you look over at your GoToWebinar control panel, you're going to find the questions tab there. We'd love for you guys to go ahead and ask any questions you have throughout the webinar. And if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. There's a ton of information we're going to be covering today, and so we're going to try to leave as much room as we can at the end to answer as many questions as we can, and then we may have to follow up with you individually after email afterwards. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Brady today to cover this topic. Again, super excited, ask questions throughout. Brady, do you want to take it from here?
Will do. Thank you so much. Thanks, Bradley. Thanks for coming. Everyone, thank you for coming, for being here. As Bradley mentioned, there is a lot that I'm going to try to cover today, so hopefully you got your notepads out and you can keep up and write things down. And remember, you will get the slides, you will get the recording. So here's my goal for today. There's some really cool research, but just an hour-long webinar on research maybe isn't the most interesting thing. So we've tried to take it and turn it around and make it real practical. So I'm going to try to give you 8 kind of email-oriented tactics that you can use to engage new donors and subscribers. That's where we're going to be headed today. So first off, where do these ideas come from and who the heck are you? So a little bit of background. So I work for NextAfter, which is a fundraising research lab based in Texas, even though I'm up in Vancouver. So if you hear me pronounce a few words like process kind of weird, it's because I'm Canadian. But we do 2 forms of research at NextAfter, and one of them is this. We possess the world's largest online fundraising experiment library. It's the world's largest because we think it's the world's only, but there's about 2,000 different experiments that we've published through clients and research partners that are trying to decode what works in fundraising. And we've published these experiments and you can view them. So for example, this one looks interesting. You can view the experiment, you can click into it, you can see who it's with, the summary, the research question, the control, and the treatment. You can see the results, whether it was statistically significant, and the key learnings. And so for example, this is one of my favorite experiments that's relatively new. This is a donation page. We got control and treatment. And you can see here on the treatment, the only difference here is the $50 that's pre-selected. The treatment has this little star that says most popular, just trying to kind of nudge people to say, hey, maybe you should give this. And what we found is it helped increase conversion rate 8%, increased average gift almost 15%. So if you get more donors and more revenue per donor, it leads to a lot more revenue, almost a 24% increase in revenue from that one little change, which is really interesting. And then we can kind of peel it back a little bit and see it's really because this strategy or tactic had a bigger influence on people from mobile. We're moving quicker, so little social nudges maybe help them make their decisions quicker, but also they're more likely to come from a social channel. So that social proof factor of most popular also potentially plays a larger role here. But that's just one of thousands of experiments. And what we're really trying to figure out is, what is it that people do, not just what people say? You and I as fundraisers and marketers, we have our own beliefs, and to be honest, we're often wrong. What we think works, it's often the opposite. So this is where experimentation is really key. And so my job is to really kind of like work through these research experiments, figure out what's working or not, and package it into these resources like this webinar today with Kindful, or ebooks or research studies, and then increasingly training, online and in-person training, so we can go deeper and say, well, how do you actually do this for your nonprofit and your charity? So that's the one main form of research that you'll see throughout here, is real experiments. And then the other one is research studies, where we become a donor, like we did in this case in partnership with Kindful here, where we really wanted to look at what's the difference between being a donor and an email subscriber. And this is really the bulk of the research that I'm going over today, where we actually looked at 2,589 emails. These came from 199 different nonprofits across 12 verticals, all in the US. And it's key to note, we were two different personas, or two different people. So we signed up for email from the homepage to receive email updates. And then from a different email address that we created, we became a donor, made a $20 donation from the homepage. Same time frame though. And so what we wanted to see is, how are they treating subscribers and donors differently in this key time frame, if at all, and what were some of the patterns that we've seen? And again, this is only made possible for free because of Kindful and their support. So huge, huge thanks again to Bradley and the team at Kindful for partnering with us on this research. And then a special thanks to Carl McQueen, who works for McQueen, Mackin and Associates. This is a lot of data to stitch together, and he was our kind of data scientist behind the scenes helping stitch this together. But we do this type of research to try to figure, like, what is it like to be a donor? What is it like to get emails from organizations? And like, what are organizations doing? And if we can see what works in fundraising and what organizations are doing, we can identify some gaps, and then hopefully that is a good spot for us to teach and train. So that's where a little bit of these ideas and we are coming from. So with that, let's get into the study. So we focused on first 45 days after becoming a donor and becoming an email subscriber. So why pick this, magical 45 days? Well, a few reasons. One, Classy produced their State of Modern Philanthropy report earlier this year when they looked at return donor behavior. And so they looked at the timeline for when someone would come back and is most likely to make a second gift, and that, or a second donation. And that chart looks something like this. And you can see actually beyond the kind of annual year anniversary, which is often around year end, the most likely time for them to make a second gift is actually right in this window. The first few weeks or first month or so of them making a donor, they are more likely to make a second donation. And when we look at when are they most likely to make a recurring gift, you see this type of chart, and it's actually the most likely that someone is to make a donation and then become a recurring donor, more so than any other time, is in this time period, this kind of 30, 45 day type window. So this may be counterintuitive, but people are actually more likely to make a second gift or a recurring gift probably sooner than you may think. Our temptation sometimes is, let's just like thank them, let's leave them alone for a while, when in reality, this is when they're most engaged. They've just seen the value, and there's an opportunity to engage and maybe move to a second gift or recurring gift. So we wanted to study this critical time period. But it's not just about donations. When we look at email engagement rates, something like open rates, click-through rates, and response rates, this is taken from a few of our clients at NextAfter compared to a benchmark from Luminate. But you can see that the open rate, the click-through rate, and the response rate is incredibly high for these first 3 emails that you send once someone subscribes or becomes a donor. And the reality is, the first emails you send are some of the most opened and read emails you will ever send in the history of your engagement with that donor or that email subscriber. So it's this really critical period to engage or maybe move to a second gift. And yet, when we've done other studies that are where we become an email subscriber or a donor, we'll often see things like this. So in Canada last year, we did a study, and we found that 51% of charities sent less than 3 emails in 30 days, so not a lot of volume. 29% of charities sent just the 1 email in 30 days, and 19% didn't send us any emails at all after we had made a donation or signed up for email. And we've seen something similar last year with Salesforce. We did a study where it's kind of a quiet period for a lot of organizations where we either get nothing or we get very little. And this is really important for us in our sector and our space, where we often talk about fundraising is like when we ask. But Roger Craver, who wrote the book on retention fundraising, talking about when it comes to lifetime value, which is the only true main metric that matters. What we do on the fundraising side, actually, I mean, it's important, but it only accounts for about 20% of the value, according to him and his research. The rest of it comes from like communications and customer service and all the little touch points and things that we're doing in between kind of our fundraising campaigns. And so when we look at data like this that was provided by Kindful and their database and users looking at retention rates, when you see the average being so low and the new donors being incredibly low, you see that, I think we actually have a communications problem more than anything. And it's what we've seen across a lot of our research is our communications, and often through email, is really what's causing a lot of the problem on the fundraising side. So that's why we wanted to study this. Is why we wanted to study the 45 days. So let's get into these tactics. Let's get into the bones. What can you actually do with this information? So tactic number one, this may sound like super simple, but I'll unpack it a bit. But like, make sure your forms are just working. Right, this may be like, I did not sign up for this webinar to be told to make my forms work. But here's the thing, we actually started out with 253 nonprofits that we wanted to include in this type of research study. We could actually only complete a donation to 80% or 20% of organizations. We could not complete an online donation. Broken form, wasn't working at the time, it was impossible to find, whatever it might be. We couldn't actually complete a donation to 20% of organizations that we wanted to look at. And when it came to email sign up, it was even higher. We could not sign up to receive emails to 29% of the organizations that we wanted to include. So right off the bat, there's a huge chunk of organizations that we couldn't even just complete the first step of this process. And then once we actually made the donation, 7% of nonprofits we gave to sent us 0 emails at all in 45 days. And 27% of nonprofits that we subscribed to get email updates sent us 0 emails in 45 days. 27% where we said, I'd like to get emails, please, sent us nothing in 45 days. So that means in the end, we could only actually give to and subscribe successfully to 159 nonprofits. But of those, only 122 actually sent an email to both of those personas that I mentioned, both the donor and the subscriber. So this is that 122 cohort. When you see like the cohort term, this is what I mean. These are the organizations that we were able to give to, subscribe, and get emails from. It's only 122, which means we were only able to subscribe, give, and get emails to both personas from 48% of nonprofits, less than half. And the median revenues for these nonprofits is about $90 million. So there's some smaller organizations, some medium sized, but there's some large organizations in here. And this wasn't what we sought out to find, but when we saw this, we were like, man alive, something is broken. Could be a broken form, could be a broken tool, could be a broken process, could be a broken like back end human process, but I don't know what for sure is going on, but something is broken. Donors want to get information and want to complete donations, and the bare minimum of being able to facilitate that is broken, let alone the next step on the bare minimum scale is sending them emails. Something is absolutely broken here. So test your email sign up and online donation forms. Like, do it today. Create a dummy Gmail account, sign up for emails. Did it work? Did you get something back? Make a donation. Is your form working? We suggest you do this once a quarter because something just might be broken. And based on this research, there's a good chance that there actually is something broken. So test your email sign up and online donation forms. All right, tactic number 2, can you be very, very clear with the purpose of your email and what you are actually asking people to do? So it's interesting when you go through like 2,589 emails, and I didn't do that personally. Our process was we actually exported these, uploaded them to Mechanical Turk, and had 3 independent analysts review each email and score it as a solicitation, a cultivation, or a confirmation email. And then we tried to have them score it as a subtype, like was this asking for a one-time donation or a recurring donation? And so to have 3 independent people that are kind of not charity nerds like me look at emails, and when it comes back, you realize, yeah, a lot of emails that we receive aren't the most clear. So for example, like this email comes from the First Tee. You're trying to make the game of golf more accessible to youth. This is one of the first emails that we received. How would you classify this email? So, look at this email for a second, and then I can scroll down so you can kind of see, right? How would you classify that email? Cultivation, solicitation, confirmation, right? They're saying thank you for signing up. It's not entirely clear, right? And if you actually go through this email, this header image is actually linking to a video on YouTube talking about the organization. It's kind of like an explainer video. Then you get into this part, which is kind of a confirmation, right? Thank you for your interest. Thank you for signing up for the email list, starting to tell you what you can expect to receive. But then they start moving to some get involved, and this looks like a button. It's not. This is just a headline. So it kind of looks like a button for me to click and get to an article. But then it actually has 3 different ways to get involved. You've got programs for kids, you could become a volunteer, there's actually a way to make a donation, and then this thing at the bottom, which looks just like that thing at the top, this actually is a button. And this is actually asking you to make a donation, but in a very, very unclear, passive way. So what is this? Confirmation, cultivation, solicitation. There's actually elements of each in this thing. And as a recipient, it's not entirely clear of like, what is the purpose and what are you asking me to do, or what do you want me to do? In the end, we decided this was mainly a cultivation email. So yes, there's an ask, but it's really passive. It does confirm, but the main purpose of this email is to kind of continue the journey and provide some more information. But again, like, what do you want me to do here? So that's just like one example. Here's a couple good examples, perhaps. This email is asking for a survey, something that we'll talk about if we have time, but you can see very clearly, take survey. The whole email's focus is for me to take this survey. So it's very clear, it's very purpose. They don't need all this extra links, right? These things aren't helping move me towards take a survey, but the main purpose is very clear. Or something like this. This is also a survey email. Take survey, and then actually all these other content links and buttons are all pointing towards the survey. So it's very clear what the purpose of the email is. They want me to take the survey, and it's very clear as a recipient what they want me to do. They want me to take the survey. Clarity is massive. The more that we do this research and fundraising, the more that we realize just being simple and clear is actually half the battle. So can you be more clear with the purpose of your emails, and then maybe try having one call to action? So even when you're creating the email, just have like a piece of paper or a spreadsheet and just say, what's the purpose of this email? Is it to engage? Is it to move to a donation? Like, what is the main purpose? And that's even a clarifying process to just say, like, what's the main purpose of this email? And then try having one call to action as the focus. And especially when it comes to like giving or fundraising, our call to action is hugely important. So on the left here, this is from the Museum of Flight. For International Women's Day, you can see that they have this call to action here. Keep them flying Fenella. Now, I don't know about you, but I have no idea what that means. So in the middle of some campaign that I think is around Fenella, but like this is a great example of such insider language. Like unless you read all their stuff and know about this campaign, keep them flying Fenella doesn't mean anything to me. In fact, it's confusing. I don't know what it means. Versus something like this, give now, give today. So whether someone's ready to give or not is a different question, but they clearly know this is what I'm being asked to do and how I can do it. And we've seen this, right? Please make your year-end gift today, or please stand with us, right? Maybe this will be more accessible. And yeah, you might get more clicks, but you'll often almost always get less donations as well. Your job with an email isn't just to drive clicks, it's to drive motivated clicks. And so when we do these kind of link baity, bait and switch call to action that are really soft and passive, you may get links, but you might get fewer donations. Where you can securely give versus find out more clicks, fewer donations. We see that all the time. So when it comes to that call to action, can you be more direct, specific, and clear in your call to action language, especially with a donation? But even if it's read this blog post, take this survey, view the annual report, whatever the call to action is, being very direct, very clear, very simple is really, really important. So that's tactic number 2. Tactic number 3, make sure all your donors and subscribers are being thanked, confirmed, and welcomed. So this is just kind of, think about like a relationship dynamic, which I do think is very useful when we talk about fundraising. And if you just kind of like meet someone, right, this is your first impression. So this is oftentimes our first impression that we're leaving. So we wanted to look at how our organization's kind of confirming, thanking, welcoming email subscribers. So as you saw in that experiment or the example with the first T, the difference between a cultivation and a confirmation is pretty, nebulous sometimes. So for this analysis, we said, let's just count them as the same. So let's just look at, did they send any confirmation or cultivation in the first few days? And for the email subscriber, we found that only 52% of nonprofits sent a clear confirmation or cultivation email in the first 2 days. So again, I just said, I would like to get your emails, please, or download this resource or whatever it might be. And then for 2 days, we didn't get anything from almost half of the nonprofits. So even if we did get emails, they didn't come right away, which means for 2 days, we're kind of in the lurch. Like, did it work? Did I get anything? And what we found earlier this year when we did a benchmark study and surveyed some of the folks, like maybe you participated in this, we found that 74% of people who participated in our benchmark study either didn't have or didn't know if they had an automated welcome series. This is such an opportunity to set up something that's pretty simple, can be automated, and just make sure that everyone who signs up and makes a donation, we leave this good first impression, because this is what can happen. So this is the first email we got from this organization on day 30. Not personalized, no reference to us signing up, no reference to our donation. It doesn't even call us by name. It's just, here's the newsletter. And if this is the first email that you received in 30 days, you might be like, who the heck is this organization? I don't even remember who they are. You haven't talked to me in 30 days and then just send me this generic newsletter out of nowhere. Compared to something like this, and again, I'm not saying this is exactly what you should do, but you can just see the difference. We got this email immediately. Hi, Jake. Personalized. All right, we're thrilled to welcome you to the Innocence Project community. Thanks for joining us. A little bit more about the organization. Here's other ways that you might be able to get involved. Now, is it most clear what they want me to do? Perhaps not, but it's a person. They have a photo and an image of who she is. Thanks for being a part of this community. There's a huge difference in my experience as a subscriber or a donor versus from the organization on the left versus the organization on the right. So can you at least create a welcome email, and ideally even just a short series for these email subscribers and donors as an easy way to make sure you leave that good first impression, or at least they just don't get nothing in that first critical time period. But then we also looked at what's happening with donors, right? So same thing. And we found that in this case, a lot more organizations are sending out thank yous, which is good. A lot of it is automated from donation tools, but only 15% did not acknowledge a donation in the first 2 days. But there's still opportunity with how we use the thank you. So again, Roger Craver in his book, Retention Fundraising, said like saying thank you is like easy retention win number one. Like this is again, the bare minimum, the basics here. It should definitely be timely and confirm the donation was received. It sounds simple, but not all thank you emails that we sent that we received did that. And then these three key things that they found make a difference in terms of future relationship, but say why the gift is appreciated, why the gift matters, and how the gift is being put to work within that thank you. So it's not just cold transaction, but appreciated, it matters, and it's already being put to work. So that could look maybe like this from Khan Academy. It's a little bit more designed, but you know, dear Keith, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your support. Talks a little bit about what your support enables, and then you can read more stories. All right, so they're trying to, it's timely, it confirms the donation, has the amount, and starts sharing kind of why the donation is needed. Maybe not so much of how it's being put to work right away, but it's got two of the three. Or something like this from Food for the Hungry, which does a lot of great work in online fundraising, a lot of great testing. I'll kind of zoom in on this very first sentence here, but thank you for your gift of $20 to Food for the Hungry. Right now, you're lifting a life out of poverty. Your generous gift is going to work immediately to help families where it's needed most, right? It's confirmed. It's why it's appreciated, lifting, or what's needed, lifting lives out of poverty, and it's being put to work right now. And even that last line is one that's really interesting, so that I know it's working, especially if you have a strategy that's trying to move to like a second gift or an additional action, to know that my donation is already being used in some way towards how I wanted it to be used is great and needed to do that. So make sure your donors are thanked, but can you use this kind of language to let them know why their donation was needed and how it's being used within your thank you? Could be a real simple change that could make a big difference for your donors after they give. So that's tactic number 3. Number 4, send more cultivation only emails to your donors. So let's unpack this a little bit. How are subscribers and donors being cultivated? So when we looked at all organizations, we looked at the subscriber and the donor and the percentages of the emails that they received, because there was more subscribers than there were donors. So on a percentage basis, the donor persona, the donor received 5% less cultivation emails, and they actually received 32% more solicitations. So after we've given, we get cultivated less and asked more. That was our experience as a donor. So actually, this kind of ratio, if you want to use this as a bit of a benchmark, again, I'm not saying this is what you should do. I'm saying this is what organizations are doing. But across all organizations, subscriber gets about 2.9 cultivation emails for every solicitation they receive, compared to just 1.5 for donors, that ratio of cultivation to solicitation. So that's for all organizations, but for the cohort organizations, remember the 122 where we could make a donation, make an email, and get emails back? This is what we found. The donor actually received 43% fewer emails overall. So email volume was quite less, significantly less. They received 61% fewer cultivation, so a lot less cultivation, and 25% fewer solicitations, so slightly less solicitation. And in the end, we see that this ratio is pretty much the same. It's a 3-to-1 ratio, cultivation to ask for the email persona, and it's a 1.6-to-1 ratio for donors in terms of cultivation to solicitation. So again, that ratio is about 3-to-1, 1.5-to-1 for subscriber and donor, but the donor's getting cultivated less as a percentage. And when we chart it out over time, this is kind of what it looks like over this 45-day period. So the subscriber, both the cultivation and solicitation emails goes down over time. I mean, slightly, it's just a kind of a slow, minor decline. But the donor chart looks something like this, where the cultivation is relatively flat, but you can see that solicitation starts to go up over time, and this ratio starts to get skewed more and more and more, where it's more solicitation focused. Now, there's a few reasons for why these charts could be different. Sometimes we were removed from a welcome series once we were a donor, or sorry, we were removed from getting regular emails. So for example, if there's a fundraising campaign, a lot of organizations will say, do not send this fundraising email to this donor until they've been on the file for 14 days or until they've gone through the welcome series. So in that first gap or that first time period, we maybe don't get fundraising emails. And then later on, we get thrown back into the pool and then would actually receive them. So like that's one reason why the charts may look this way. But it's also just a question like, how are we cultivating donors as time goes on? When we did the research study with Salesforce last year, we had 3 donor personas, and we saw a similar trend where over time, cultivation starts dropping off and solicitation starts ramping up. And part of it is I think we have a stewardship plan or a thank you plan or a short-term plan after a donation. And then as time kind of starts to go on, we kind of like, well, we're not really sure what to do with these folks anymore or how to treat them any differently. And so they just kind of get the same things, or we just ask them on a regular schedule or cadence. So one thing for you to think about, and as we've done more experiment of kind of like, what's the true impact of cultivation? Because we've always talked about it, like 7 touch points to 1 ask, and there's some kind of like, best practices, but I don't know if anyone's ever proven like the ROI direct value of cultivation specifically. So this is what we are actually trying to figure out in this experiment. So context here, this client, they were asking twice as much as they were cultivating once we did an analysis of 12 months. So that ratio is like skewed the other way. So they were asking a lot compared to cultivation. The hypothesis here was, could we increase engagement and giving by increasing cultivation communication? So the design was a once a week email from Sarah, the digital content manager, promoting one piece of content, often just pointing to one blog post. That was it. And then this analysis was based on 3 months of data. We've since continued the experiment for another 3 months and have seen similar-ish results that I'll talk about at the end. So, basically 1 extra email a week, promoting piece of content, cultivation only from 1 person. That's the design experiment. And here was the result after 3 months. When we looked at engagement, so engagement being defined as an open or a click of an email, you can see that across the board for these 3 segments, donors, lapsed donors, and non-donors, we saw an increase in engagement, 42%, 72%, and 109%. So increased engagement across all segments. It actually averaged out to about an 80% increase in engagement. So more engagement, this is great. When we look at the percentage of people giving, we see something similar, an increase across all 3 segments, a 7%, 37%, or 3% increase in the number of people giving just from getting this 1 additional cultivation focused email. It was about an 8.1% increase in donors over this 3-month time period. And then lastly, revenue. This is the one where we see 2 green arrows and 1 red arrow, but 23% for donors, a 14% increase for lapsed, and actually a small or 21% decrease for non-donors, but not a lot of revenue. So in the end, this experiment resulted in 21% increase in revenue over this 3-month time period. And actually, once we expanded this out to be 6 months, this is more like 40% increase in revenue from the group that only received, that got the extra cultivation email versus the group that didn't. But in this 3-month time period, 1 additional cultivation only focused email increased engagement 80%, donors 8%, and revenue 21%. So can you try sending more pure cultivation emails? No additional ask, no passive ask, take off the donate button, provide value in some way. Here's an interesting article, something for you, impact report. Just focus on cultivation only and add that to your mix, and you should see more revenue later on from fundraising campaigns. Try sending more pure cultivation emails. Now, a quick note on solicitation, because I know everyone's interested, like, how often do people ask and things like that. A few kind of quick stats when we look at subscriber and donor. Day 31 was the highest volume of solicitations for both the subscriber and the donor. So it's pretty interesting. So this hints at some of our automation, of kind of either in a welcome series, we'll ask on day 31, or people on kind of a monthly calendar or something like that. But it's interesting that right about a month was the day that we were most likely to get asked for money. The median nonprofit sent the subscriber their first solicitation on day 8 for a subscriber versus day 13 for the donor. So again, a little bit quicker to ask for an email subscriber, a little bit later for the donor. Could be some of the rules that we have for segments. But when we looked, 58% of nonprofits asked the email subscriber in the first 45 days, or the other way around, 42% of nonprofits did not ask an email subscriber to give in 45 days. And then on the other side, 45% of nonprofits that we made a donation to made a donation ask in the first 45 days. Or put the other way, 55% of nonprofits did not ask donors for an additional gift in the first 45 days. So again, strategically, looking at that classy data that I showed earlier, where people are more likely to make a second gift in this time period, maybe this is an opportunity to actually have a second gift ask or an upgrade to a recurring ask in this time frame, because it looks like not a lot of organizations are doing that very well or very clearly, and that could be an opportunity. So again, finding that balance between pure cultivation and when someone's engaged, asking and leading them to the next action is key. So that's point number 4. Number 5, try sending emails on off-peak hours and days. So we looked at the 2,500 plus emails and used the timestamp on it to try to figure out when our nonprofits actually sending their emails, and we get to create this cool heat map. It's probably my favorite chart I get to create, which is how you know you're like a super nerd, when you're like, this is amazing, look at this chart. But here's all the cultivation emails charted out by date and time. And the more red it is, the deeper the color of red, the more emails we received. And the more green it is, the fewer emails that we receive. So we found that 50% of cultivation emails were sent from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. So everyone's kind of sending cultivation emails for the most part in that region, whereas only 18% of cultivation emails were sent the few hours before or the few hours after, and even fewer emails, about 16.5% of cultivation emails were sent on the weekend. Right? So you can see, especially Sundays, quite green, and Saturdays fairly green. So not a lot of organizations are sending a little early, a little late, and definitely less on the weekends. And then we see something similar, but even a little bit more extreme for solicitation emails, where 65% of ask emails were sent from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. And again, fewer emails, 15.6 were sent the few hours before and the few hours after. And again, even fewer emails focused on asking were sent on the weekends. So an idea based on this is, can you try sending your cultivation and solicitation emails at these off-peak hours and days? So a little bit earlier than everyone else, maybe on the cultivation side, and then a little bit later in the day, perhaps on the donation side, where people aren't often like waking up in the morning ready to give, whereas in the afternoon, they're more likely to make a purchase. There's some research on the e-commerce side, and then weekends as well. We ran this experiment a few times, and this is one example from one client. So, it's not gospel truth for everyone, but there could be an opportunity here where we've seen up to a 50% higher average gift on emails sent on the weekend, right? And part of this is the idea of contra competitive timing. A guy named Dan Zarella came up with this term when he did an analysis of social media posts, and found that posts that were done on the weekend, maybe to get fewer like impressions or views, but would have a lot more engagement, because it's less crowded, it's less noisy, fewer people are posting at that time. And then also people are in a position or a time where they actually are more likely to engage. So again, think about your emails that you get at work, 11 a.m., like your inbox is full, you're working, you're just you're crushing through your inbox. Are you really ready to engage with a financial ask? Maybe, maybe not. Whereas on a Saturday or a Sunday, your kid's napping, you got a cup of coffee, you're kind of clearing out your inbox, maybe you're a lot more likely to actually engage. So you may get fewer opens and fewer clicks, but you may get more donations and potentially a much higher average gift. So it'll balance out, the lower volume will be compensated by the higher average amount. So maybe that's something worth trying for your email strategy. I know when it comes to year end, we do this type of analysis on year end emails, and that's one of the tactics that we suggest organizations experiment with, because email volumes are so high at year end. It's even harder to kind of cut through the clutter. And this is one strategy that you may be able to take by sending at off-peak hours and days with your emails. All right, number 6, try sending emails that look, sound, and feel like they are from a person to a person. So here's what I mean. We looked at who the email was from, or the email sender. So this is actually the main way that you and I and we actually kind of triage our inbox, right? So here's our aggregate inbox. You can see all the different emails we get. And at a subconscious level, what we all do is like, which do we prioritize? Which ones are we going to open or delete or read later or mark as spam or unsubscribe? And the first step of that process is looking at the email envelope, which is this. You've got who it's from, the subject line, and the preview text. And who it's from is actually the main thing that we use to kind of triage our inboxes. So what were organizations doing in terms of who are they sending emails from? We found that 74% of all the emails that we received were from an organization only. So that looks like this, right? Just the organization name, just the organization, just the organization. So just the brand name of the organization. 74% of all our emails looked like that, came from just the organization. 17% of emails were sent from a person, comma, organization. So like this, right? Michaela Smiley comma, organization, or this one, Emily Stevenson, comma, organization. And just 9% of emails were sent from just a person. So Sarah Tesh or Rebecca Warwick. So you can see even just in that screenshot kind of roughly how it breaks out. The vast majority are from an organization, fewer use a name, and even fewer use just a name. And so we actually looked at this approach and said, does this change depending on the focus of the email? And we did actually see a small difference where solicitation emails were more likely to have someone's name in it compared to confirmation receipt or cultivation emails, which is kind of interesting. So when it comes time to ask, we're willing to be a little bit more personal, but still only 36% took this approach. But even when we received emails that were sent from a person, so they're kind of using this tactic of how do we stand out and increase results, which I'll share about in a second, but not all the emails actually felt like they came from a person. So for example, here's email 1, here's email 2, both came from a person, right? So Ingrid or Albert. So just kind of this personal approach, trying to stand out. But you can see right away, like they have some similarities. They're text heavy, they're copy heavy. They kind of go down linearly. They're signed off by the sender. So there's some common traits, but there's also some big differences. Like the PETA email on the left has this big banner image, this big headline, view this message online, some kind of like marketing giveaways, and you can tell that it's kind of created in a marketing machine. Versus on the right, you can see that it's like a raw link. There's no signature in there, and the logo is sent all the way to the, so it kind of feels a lot more like a personal email that you might receive from a friend or a family member. And then actually, if you scroll down, you can see all the extra design and links and resources and all the possible things that you might be able to click. And so kind of going back to that first point or second point around like, can you be more clear? Like, what do you want me to do, PETA? And if this is really what you want me to do, why don't you just send this email, right? Take out all this branding and design, focus me in on the copy and text, and then point me to this one link. Like, why do we need all this extra design? Why do we need all the extra links below? If we take a more personalized, individualized communication approach, just send me this email. Because we've seen that this actually really works when it comes to fundraising. You can get more opens. Organization name versus just a person, increase 28% of opens. Organization name added versus removed. By removing the organization, 18% increase in email opens. So try sending emails from a person or a person, comma, organization if you must, to increase your engagement and open rate. But more importantly, carry this through to your kind of copy and design, you can get more donations. So kind of control treatments, or there's a little slide jank there, but design versus kind of much fewer design elements, much less design, more clicks and way more donations. And this organization was like, wow, that's interesting. Like everyone says you should kind of send an email like the one on the left. Well, what if we take this a step further and kind of strip out even more design and make it even more personal in tone? And they saw another big increase in donations. And if I put these side by side, you can actually see and feel and hear the differences in terms of this more personal approach. So first off, logo placement reduced. What do you think of when you see a big logo as the first thing in an email? They're marketing to me. They're selling to me. Do you want to be marketed to, or do you want to be communicated with? So let's move that logo to the very bottom so that, yes, it builds trust. No one really gives that much of a crap about your logo, but hey, let's have it. Let's put it at the bottom. All right, call to action. When you send an email to a friend, hey, cool blog post. Are you hand coding these big buttons? No, you're probably using a raw link or maybe a hyperlink. So they said, let's do that in this email. Let's have a hyperlink, no button. And then even the tone, right? On the left, when your world has been turned upside down, every connection counts, every bit of strength, every heart brought together. That's how I read it. It sounds very dramatic prose, and it's just right out of the gate, just talking at you. Versus, I know you've been using Caring Bridge recently to stay connected to your loved ones, and I hope it's been a source of strength for you. Again, it's taking this more personal tone and approach, and it goes on. Right now, we're in a short campaign to raise money to keep Caring Bridge there for you and those like you who need a safe, protected place during life's most challenging times. Versus on the left, it goes on this story about Erica, whose 6-month-old son. It's kind of like they just took parts of a direct mail letter and just copied it into their email. But the problem with that is the one on the left versus the one on the right, it's not only personal, but it's missing the magic word, you. On the right, you've, your, you. It's about me as the donor, as the recipient, as opposed to it being about you and what you want to talk about. And so when you stack it all up, the logo, the button, the more personal tone and approach, the use of you, it gets a much, much higher rate of donations. So one of the ideas here is try testing a plain text style of email design. I can't tell you how many times we ran this experiment. People hear this webinar, take our online courses, take our in-person workshops, and do this approach and email us back and say, my gosh, I can't believe that this worked for us as well. Remove the design and maybe be more personal and human. One tip here is like read your copy out loud. And just by reading it out loud, sometimes you can be like, oh my gosh, this is all about us, or this doesn't sound very personal at all. Just try making it more human, as if you're emailing just that one friend across the street from you.
Hey, Brady.
Yo.
Real quick, funny enough, we did this same test on this webinar. And so we sent a branded email from Kindful versus a text-based email to our total database. And we're not a nonprofit, we're a for-profit organization, but we did see in the text-based email that was from me that did not include anything from Kindful. So the sender was Bradley Martin. So some of you guys probably got what looked like a personalized email from me. We saw a 42% increase in opens, and then we followed that through with a text-based email with just a link to register versus a button, and we saw 52% more clicks than the branded email. So wow. Just wanted to highlight that, again, this is great information for nonprofits, but even work for us as a for-profit, that is trying to get people to attend a webinar. So just wanted to throw that little tip in.
No, that's awesome. Well, and if any of y'all get our emails at NextAfter, or maybe after this, hopefully you sign up and you'll see this is our approach. And again, we test a lot of stuff and we have been able to beat this type of approach. And again, part of it is you can stand out from others. Again, this Contra competitive strategy, 9% of people are just sending from a person. In the Canadian study, we looked at their solicitations, and only 3% of fundraising emails kind of looked and felt like that real stripped down personal email. So the vast majority of emails that donors receive kind of like look the same from the same type of organization. And so this is a way to be more human and personal, which works in fundraising, but it also helps you stand out. And again, it's not just about solicitation or asks. In this cultivation experiment, that extra email was just from one person, Sarah, not the CEO, just the digital content person. It was stripped down, designed, personally written, and linked to a blog post. So can you try this more human looking, sounding, and feeling approach in your cultivation emails? We've seen people run this experiment with their newsletters, the like holy cow sacred newsletter of just stripping it down, making it personal, and sending just like raw links, and it increasing opens and engagement and clicks as well. All right, so I'll go through these last two real quick so that we can have some time for questions here. But can you show Facebook ads to new subscribers? So this is kind of not really an email tactic, but kind of. So in the past, we've seen that showing targeted digital advertising could improve direct mail results. So we ran an experiment with a client where they targeted direct mail recipients with Facebook ads and saw almost a 200% increase in response rate. And so a charity up in Canada saw that and said, hey, you know what, we can do that. That's not that hard. So they ran the same experiment. They spent $690 on Facebook ads targeting the direct mail donors, split them into two groups, and saw a $10,000 increase in revenue from those who saw Facebook ads, or a 25% increase in revenue. But critically, These ads did not have an ask or a link to a donation. This wasn't the, hey, let's have the same appeal, put it in a Facebook ad. No, the concept here is about priming. So you're just trying to leave an impression. So the ads are about content or videos or impact or something like that, but it's not an ask. That's really, really crucial if you take this strategy. And so he said, well, why don't we take the same approach for email subscribers? And so that's what we did with this one client. So their email welcome series looked like this: 5 emails over about 7 days. That was kind of what their welcome series looked like. And then in the treatment, half the people that were going through the welcome series just saw Facebook ads. And again, the goal here was to just leave an impression. And they saw a 760% increase in conversion rate from those in the welcome series that just saw Facebook ads. Didn't have to click it, didn't have to convert from it, just see it. Increased a 760% increase in conversion rate. And interesting, the time to give went down to 17 days compared to 29 days for those who didn't see the Facebook ad. So they're more likely to give, and they're more likely to give earlier on, which is really, really interesting. So that also isn't, it's a little bit more advanced, but it's not the most difficult strategy. So if you're running a welcome series or even just showing ads in this critical time period, maybe that's something that you can do. And then number 8, kind of an underused tool that we found, is using a survey for new subscribers and donors in your first few emails. So a newsletter was by far the most commonly used type of cultivation or content type, but surveys or giving feedback of some kind was one of the least used forms of cultivation content. In fact, just 1.5% of subscribers and 4.5% of donors received a specific call to action around a survey. So some benefits of a survey: there's this perception that you care, and I use the word perception intentionally here, like hopefully you do care, but even just being perceived that you care about them actually is a way to build up trust and have a more positive brand experience. You can better understand what your donors say they care about or are interested in. Again, there could be a big gap between what they say and what they do, but it's still important that we understand or try and listen. It's also just non-obtrusive content that can often help get opens and clicks to kind of maintain email list health. So the more time goes on that someone hasn't opened or clicked an email, it not only limits the chances of them opening and clicking an email, but also everyone else on your email list when you keep sending emails to people that haven't engaged. Email service providers like dock your domain and you're sending email. So it's critical to like trim those people off or find ways to engage, and kind of a re-engagement survey or even just an ask of a survey is one way to get engagement that's not too threatening, right? It's not an ask, it's just kind of, hey, we'd love to hear from you. But critically, this comes from the agitator and folks at Donor Voice who do a lot more work in this space than I do. But there's 4 key areas to look at in a survey. So it's not just like willy-nilly surveying, but like, how do you know more about their identity or how they identify, more about maybe their preferences, how do you better understand their satisfaction, and how can you gauge their commitment to your cause? They've linked these 4 areas to lifetime value or overall donor loyalty. So this is what you're kind of like trying to get at strategically with some surveys. So a few examples, here's like a reactivation one. So the Innocence Project actually sent us this email 34 days after signing up and said, hey, you haven't read any of our emails in a while. Do you want to update your profile or let us know what you're trying to get? So this is an interesting strategy. We do this around the 60-day mark for a lot of our clients. So this is pretty early on in the process. But again, if someone hasn't opened an email in 60 days, the chances that they're just going to open an email like 3 months later is very small. So again, how do you front load this and maybe offer like, what are we doing that's not working? So it's a pretty interesting strategy. And can you send this type of reactivation email to unengaged subscribers after 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, kind of at the latest? Again, once it's beyond 3 months, you're starting to get into dangerous territory. And if they haven't, you should be removing them from your email list. But here's a few other surveys. Wounded Warrior Project, I showed you this example earlier where they just focused on the take the survey. But then here's their simple survey, right? Are you a veteran? Trying to get at identity. Do you have a relative or a friend that is a veteran? How do you identify with kind of as a person related to our cause? And then they ask for kind of preferences. What topics are you interested in? They're not saying, what do you want to receive updates on? They're not drawing that link necessarily, but they're interested in knowing what is it that you're interested in, right? They're trying to get a sense of preferences. Heritage Action for America, the same day as donation, they have this satisfaction link. Tell us how we did. How was your giving experience? Did you like it? Did you not? They're trying to get some immediate satisfaction feedback. Or Food for the Hungry, showed you this email earlier as well. 15 days after sign up, they were really trying to get like, what's your ministry passion? So a little bit of preferences, but it's really kind of a way for them to gauge commitment. How committed or connected am I to the cause of food for the hungry? Because not all donors believe as passionately about your organization, and their commitment or their identification with your mission is actually the main thing that can predict whether or not they will be a long-term supporter. Even someone who gives a large donation amount, that's not a real good predictor of future engagement. Someone's commitment or the frequency of donations are a lot more predictable in terms of driving lifetime value. So if you use a survey, which could be a great way to add to a great thing to add your welcome series, make sure you kind of try to identify, why are we sending this survey? Either how do we deliver more value to the donor or email subscriber, or how do we gain some very critical information so that we can prioritize time or customize content or, you know, improve downstream value of those donors. So I went through quite a bit. Hopefully something in there stood out as being interesting and useful. The 8 email tactics, I won't go over them again, but again, you can find them in the slides. And the real takeaway for me and for us as an organization and a training and research lab is, we think there's a huge communications opportunity. The solution to declining fundraising results can't just be, let's just ask more. We need to get a lot smarter and wiser about how we do communications. And I think the communication side, the cultivation side, is a massive opportunity for organizations of all sizes. And so hopefully this is useful and kind of you know, a bit of a guidepost for you as you go further down this path. So if you do want to go deeper, I think Bradley said they're going to send out this link, but the full donor report can be downloaded at cultivatingdonors.com. You get all the stats, all the information. We break down a few different organizations and how they use their welcome series in there. If you're looking for more like training, especially like, man, how do I take this, you know, online, this personalized email approach? We've actually created certification workshops in multiple areas, and one of them is actually email fundraising optimization, where you can take this course online on demand. You can get certified in email fundraising optimization. There's a quiz at the end. There's also a membership option where you can take all of our courses, but that's more hands-on training that you can take. And for all these kind of resources, you know, podcast or resources or training or research, if you go to nextafter.com/institute, that's going to be the best link for you to find any and all of this stuff. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for attending. I think we've got some time for questions. And again, if we don't have time right now, that's my email, but also we'll try to do our best to follow up with you after the fact if we can't get to your question.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brady. I mean, every time we present this data, I learn more, and I feel like there's so many actionable items that you can do in here. And, you know, again, for our users, go check your forms, make sure they're working. If you don't have a way for people to sign up for your email address, go or your email newsletter, think about how you can add that to your website. There's some real low hanging fruit here. Test out, you know, sending an email from just you as a person versus your organization. Just see what happens. See what happens if you send an ask on a weekend. There's just so many little things you can take here and try and see if they improve for your organization. We do have quite a few questions. And so, Brady, if it's okay, why don't we do just like a little bit of like a fire drill here where we'll try to get through as many as we can.
Let's do it.
And there's some more in-depth ones that we'll make sure we send over to Brady, and, you know, he'll go through and see if he can respond to you via email or get in touch with you directly. But the first one that came through kind of early on was, should I send a separate confirmation email for a donation than a thank you note or email? So, you know, there's kind of that transactional thank you or a transactional receipt, and then do you think it would be worth sending a separate thank you note?
Yes, 100%. You know, sometimes we're kind of, you know, it depends and you should test it. I think this is one of the areas where we're pretty unequivocal. The acknowledgement often is very transactional and the thank you is very different. And combining those two into one, sometimes you can pull it off, but what's the harm in thanking a donor an additional time? Like, who doesn't want to be thanked, honored, acknowledged, know how their donation's making a difference? So I would say make your acknowledgement better, but also send a very, very specific thank you.
Awesome. And then this is a very specific question. You may not have this data available, but you gave the example about halfway through of the organization who was sending, just started sending more cultivation emails and saw an increase in their donations and things like that, and their revenue. Do you have the data, or do you know if they saw an increase in unsubscribes as well, or did it stay relatively flat?
Decrease. The I shouldn't say that for sure in terms of decrease. But what did go up is the open and click-through rate, 80%. So there's a common misconception that the more email we send, the more unsubscribes we'll get. And what we've seen is that the pattern's actually a little bit of like a valley, where like once you start sending some more email, there often can be a bit of a drop off where some people who are kind of like fringe fans who don't love you and all of a sudden they're getting a little bit more content go, I don't really like this. But then over time it really stabilizes, and then the people who do get your emails are way more engaged. They're the ones who want it, they're the ones who have it. The biggest thing that leads to unsubscribes is huge gaps in communication. So even if you just send one email a month, if someone opens, 40% or 50, say 50% of the time, they could go like 6 months perhaps without actually engaging with an email, at which point they're basically done. So a almost universal strategy is to increase email volume, but a huge caveat is what's the content and what's the quality of content. Sending out a very organizational centric crappy faux newsletter isn't going to help engagement, so don't send any more of those. But sending out a personal email with like, here's a cool blog post I think you might be interested in, you can send a lot more of those. So the whole question about volume and unsubscribes is really tricky, but unsubscribe actually isn't that bad of a metric. The engagement metrics is what you should be focusing on.
That's great. So some person asked, Emily asked about using a tool like Mailchimp or Constant Contact or something to make emails look personal if the information's still at the bottom. And if it's okay, I'll take that one because
Great.
we use, if Emily, if you go look in your email provider, you can probably find a pretty plain text version that doesn't have an image at the top, or oftentimes you can just remove the image and then just start it like you would any email, right? And write it out. And of course, there is going to be the bottom footer that has like the unsubscribe and things like that. But again, the test I mentioned, we sent that from Emma Email Marketing that still has both those things at the bottom. And we still saw a 42% increase, I think, in opens and a 52% increase in clicks. And personally, I think I got like 15 responses of people emailing me personally back, giving me some feedback or telling me they couldn't come or something like that. So I think if you just go look at the templates in Mailchimp, you should be able to find one that's super plain text that you could use. So let's see. So Brady, there was quite a few questions about the Facebook ads. Could you clarify that a little bit more? I think there were some people that were confused by, did you mean that you're running Facebook ads in the email? I think I understand what you mean, that you're running them in conjunction with one another, but can you explain just a little bit of clarity that you're still sending your email newsletter and you're just going in and running some Facebook ads at the same time?
Yeah, correct. So the experiment with showing ads to people in the welcome series, people in each group got all 5 emails. They received the exact same emails and the exact same cadence, the exact same style. Nothing changed. The only difference was half the people, or the treatment group, were shown brand-focused Facebook ads while they were in the welcome series, or actually for the first kind of 30, 45 days while they were on the file. And that's what led to the huge increase in conversion rate and shortening the time frame. So again, it's not that difficult to do, where you go like, depending on your tools, there's a way to automate it. But even if not, like new email subscribers go into this Facebook audience. This Facebook audience sees these types of impression-focused Facebook ads for 30 days or 45 days or something like that. It's relatively easy to set up.
Okay, and then I think, to be respectful of everyone's time, this will be the last question we ask, but I think it's a great one. Can you provide a couple of, off the top of your head, examples of cultivation emails? I can see where a lot of people may just get caught up on this. Like, this sounds great, Brady, but where do I start? Like, if I'm sending some asks, I'm sending out some solicitations, but if I want to start with cultivation, what would be the easiest way to start there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the easy things is you take one of the emails that you send that often has like 3 or 4 calls to action or action items, and you split it up. So, even that first T example, instead of having volunteer programs for kids and donate, just take out programs for kids and make it that's one email. Hey, do you have any kids? Here's a program that you might be interested in. Here's the value of it. Here's where you can learn more. Boom, that's one email. Volunteer opportunities. We rely on the support of people financially, but also with their time. Would you consider, volunteering? It's a way to use your skills, blah, blah, blah. Here's where you can find out more. Boom. So now you've got 2 cultivation type engagement focused emails, not asking for money, instead of just putting it all into one. And same thing for newsletters. Like the strategy of a newsletter, like let's jam a ton of important content into one email and hope that they open, engage, and read it all is a pretty flawed strategy if you just think about it. So even just separating out newsletter style content and creating like, hey, here's the blog post for this week. We just got this video from the field. Think you might be interested in it. So that's a pretty easy starting point. Two, if you do have a blog or produce any type of content, that's a great thing to do, is just like, here's new content for you. That's a pretty easy one. Or even just asking for a reply. So whether it's a survey, but even just sending a more personal email and be like, hey, you made a donation 3 months ago. Thank you so much. Would you mind just replying to this email, letting me know like how we're doing, and just get in a conversation with people? That's a really easy, disarming email to send as well. Obviously, you got to be ready to respond back if they respond, but those are a few ways that can maybe make it easier to send out more frequency of cultivation content.
All right. Well, Brady, thank you again for taking the time to present all this. Again, we're so happy to be able to bring it to everybody. And again, we're going to send out an email tomorrow. We'll have a recording of the webinar, a PDF of the slides, and then also the link for you directly to go download the full, I think it's like 30 pages or something like that, ebook, where you can dive a little bit deeper. So again, thanks so much, Brady. Thanks for the time, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks everyone.